Hi, my name is Corey, and I'm a CG specialist here at Chaos Group. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to our latest render engine, VRay 5 for SketchUp. Together, we will explore the incredible new features available in VRay 5 that help you to work faster, get beautiful looking images with less effort, enhance your materials and textures with greater realism, and go further than ever in post-production using the incredible new built-in compositing capabilities in VRay 5. To start, we'll begin by exploring the brand new VRay Vision viewer. VRay Vision is a real-time rasterizer, meaning it functions like a game engine to calculate 3D images and animations. VRay Vision is built right into VRay 5, so that you can get real-time feedback as you work in your scenes, and even save images or animations from the Vision viewer. Or when you're ready, seamlessly switch to VRay for production rendering. Next, we'll introduce you to the redesigned VRay frame buffer in VRay 5, which is where you can see your renders, as well as manage your post-processing. And then, we will take a look at the improved sky in VRay 5 and use it with the new Light Gen tool to automatically generate tons of lighting scenarios for our scene, as well as using customized HDR images to get stunning looking skies without any additional effort. We'll also explore several updates to shading workflows, ranging from new shader layers, such as the coat and sheen parameters that simplify your workflow for adding realism to your materials, to the updated material library, which now incorporates the new shader layers, and uses updated high-resolution textures and more. Additionally, we'll look at the new built-in randomization options, such as the updated multi-sub texture, which now offers hue, saturation, and gamma variation controls, as well as the new UVW placement texture, which offers randomization parameters such as the powerful stochastic tiling method. Finally, we'll explore the new light mix and compositing options, which make it possible to make drastic changes to your image's lighting, even after doing a production render. With the addition of a powerful layer-based compositor, you can even make fine-tuned adjustments to your image, ranging from adjusting curve values and blending modes for specific render elements, to adding color corrections such as filmic tone mapping to make your image pop. Let's go ahead and jump into a scene I've prepared here in advance to showcase these powerful new features. Let's get started by first taking a look at the new VRay Vision viewer. VRay Vision is a lightweight real-time viewer that is smoothly integrated into VRay 5 for SketchUp. It functions like a game engine under the hood, using 3D rasterization to get you lightning-fast previews without ever having to leave the VRay ecosystem. Now, you can adjust your lights, move your camera, and shade your scene with real-time feedback, allowing you to set up your scenes very quickly. We can test materials in the design process, explore designs, play with lighting scenarios, and even walk around and navigate within your scenes in real time. If getting fast results is the highest priority, you can even use VRay Vision to export images and export animations to get a rendered preview of your camera in motion. To open up the Vision viewer, we can simply click on the VRay Vision icon up here in the Tools panel. You'll see that it opens in a separate window, which you can position on your screen wherever you'd like. Let's first take a look at some of the controls up top here. At the top left, we have the Live Link icon, which indicates if the Live Link with VRay is currently active, and opens up the Live Link panel, where some live session options can be changed. When Live Link is enabled, it means that any changes you make in your SketchUp scene will be automatically updated and displayed in the Vision viewer. Next, we have a folder icon for loading in VR scene files into the viewer. Next to that, we have the Info icon, which displays useful information such as a handy list of shortcuts. After that, we have the resolution modes, which we can toggle between Fit and Window, which matches the window size and aspect ratio, and Match Scene Aspect, which matches the aspect ratio from the VRay render settings, though the size of the image is still determined by the window size. Next, we have the Camera Navigation mode, which lets us use the Tab key to toggle between the standard Orbit mode and Fly mode, which enables me to fly around the scene like in a game engine, using the WASD-QE keys and left-clicking and dragging to look around. You can hold down Shift to temporarily increase the movement speed as well. Next, we have the option to enable or disable auto exposure. Of course, we also have a settings panel, which allows us to tweak various controls from auto exposure to movement speed and sensitivity. You can check out our docs page for more detailed information about these different settings. We also have a color corrections panel. This gives us access to the type of tone mapping applied to the image, as well as standard color correction controls such as exposure, contrast, and so forth. Finally, we have the save options, which let us manage everything from the file format to the output resolution to whether we want to explore an animation, and so forth. Alright, let's move on and do a little exploration of our scene here. You can see that by simply clicking and dragging while moving the mouse around, I'm able to orbit and rotate my perspective. Meanwhile, clicking the middle mouse button and dragging lets me move my position. Now I'd like to demonstrate how I can make changes in SketchUp's viewport as I work, while getting real-time feedback in the viewer thanks to VRay Vision's live link to SketchUp. Now that I've got the Vision viewer and SketchUp lined up side by side, let's take a look at how working in my SketchUp scene looks in Vision. To start, we can just do some basic modeling here in SketchUp, and you'll see that it updates right away here in the Vision viewer. I can navigate around in SketchUp, and my changes are updated and fully lit and shaded with real-time feedback in the viewer. Great! Now that I have some simple geometry here to work with, let's start applying some materials from the VRay Asset Editor. For example, I can try out some different brick materials to see what works well for this scene's geometry. Next, I've already prepared some additional geometry in advance for this section, so let's go ahead and unhide these curtains here. I'm also going to place some trees in the scene here. And let's also add in a person. Okay, great. Now that you've seen how we can work to make some quick changes with modeling, shading, and assembling a scene using Vision's live link, let's unhide some additional geometry in the scene before we move on to explore lighting. For example, I'm going to unhide this geometry here, and you'll see that if we switch back to Vision, it will show up right away. Since I've already prepared most of this scene in advance, let's go ahead and unhide the rest of the geometry here in SketchUp, and I'll show you how that updates back in Vision. Great! Now let's take a look at tweaking the sunlight using Vision. I'll first make sure we have our sunlight enabled here in SketchUp, and then let's head over to Vision to make some further changes to it. We can easily make changes to the sunlight direction in Vision by holding Shift and using the left mouse button to control its altitude when going up and down, and we can control its azimuth when dragging left and right. You'll see that as I do this, the sunlight adjusts in our scene right away, allowing us to find an ideal position for our camera with real-time feedback. In fact, you can even hold Shift and drag the right mouse button to adjust the sun's intensity up and down. Also, at any time, you can press F5 to reset the sun position and the lighting changes so as to match the original scene state. This is because VRay Vision is a viewer, so any changes you make in Vision will not affect the SketchUp scene. Now let's disable the sun for a moment and instead enable a dome light I have set up in advance. You'll see that in Vision, we can also get a preview of the dome light as well, so you have plenty of ways you can light your scene and get real-time feedback. Let's open up the right-hand flyout menu and make some tweaks to the dome light's horizontal rotation parameter. Back in Vision, you'll see that we can see the rotation happening as well, allowing me to quickly make artistic decisions about how to light the scene without needing to wait for a preview. Also, note that when you have the automatic IBL sun option enabled in the Vision settings, Vision will automatically add a directional light based on the brightest spot in the HDR image you're using, to help you get a more accurate lighting preview. However, this option has no effect if the project's sun is enabled, and it is not recommended if an HDR without a visible sun is used. Alright, let's disable the dome light and switch to the final dome light I have set up here for my scene. I'm also going to enable some additional artificial lights that I already set up here in advance, and let's see how that all looks. Okay, great. So far, so good. Now you can see how Vision is able to support various lighting scenarios, ranging from bright and sunny days to dome lights with evening skies and a large number of artificial lights in the scene. Alright, since I'm liking how this scene looks, let's explore how we can work with a camera animation using VRay Vision. Back in SketchUp, I'm first going to enable the animation toggle in the asset editor settings. I've already set up a straightforward camera animation in SketchUp, so now all we have to do is go back to Vision and press the play button to see a preview of it. Now you can see that we're getting a nice and smooth camera animation in Vision. I think that this looks pretty good, so let's do an export so that I could use this to send to a client, for example. Simply clicking on the save icon, I can specify an output file path. Now, all I have to do is enable the Export Animation checkbox, and it will render out as an animation sequence at the frames per second value we set below. Simply press Export to start the process, and you can watch the resulting preview as it's exporting. Alright, now you've seen a preview of the incredible power of rendering with VRay Vision, and how it can both enhance and speed up your workflow with real-time feedback as you develop your scenes. Note that whenever you're finished working on your scene with Vision, you can at any time select the VRay 5 render engine of your choice and render out a high-quality ray-traced image or animation. This means you get both the speed advantages of real-time feedback with the option to switch to rendering a fully ray-traced production image. Let's move forward now to explore some of the other new features available in VRay 5. Okay, let's now take a look at the new VRay frame buffer in VRay 5. The new VRay frame buffer has been redesigned to not only enhance your render experience, but also offer powerful new functionality that lets you go beyond rendering. Let's go ahead and open it up with an image I've rendered in advance so I can give you a tour. Alright, I've got the VFB open here with an image from one of the scenes we'll be exploring a bit further later on. To start, let's take a look at these icons at the top right here, which serve as our main render controls. These closely resemble the render controls from VRay Next, but are redesigned. Here you'll find the option to save an image out of the VFB, and then next to that is the clear icon, which clears the contents of the frame buffer. Next, we have the option to toggle on rendering based on the proximity to the mouse, and then we have the render region mode, which enables us to draw out a specific region of the image that we'd like to render. Lastly, we have the interactive render button, which lets us interactively make changes to our scene while rendering, the stop render button, and finally, we have the production render button. Next, on the top left here, we have a few drop-down menus, such as the File menu for saving and loading rendered image channels, other menus for accessing the render and follow mouse buttons, a View menu for accessing display color space controls, and lastly, the VFB settings, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Down here on the left, we can double-click on this handle here to open up the History panel. Here we can store a history of rendered images with their post-production corrections, and do A/B comparisons between images. However, to use it, we'll first need to enable the history in the VFB settings menu. Simply head over to the History tab, check on Enabled, and then specify a history folder path to save your history images to. You can use your project folder, or add a custom path to a different folder as well. In this case, I'll just paste the folder path I copied in advance here. Finally, click Save and Close to save your changes to the VFB settings. Now the icons up at the top of the History tab become available to use. I'm going to click on the green plus icon here, which will save the image I have rendered currently to the VFB history. You'll see as I hover over the images that I'm given some information about their render times as well. And if I right-click on a saved image here, I can add a note to the saved render, as well as choose from options such as loading in post-processing layers from a saved image. Next, let's click the A/B icon here, which you'll see enables us to do an A/B comparison between images. You'll see we have a few different options here for formatting, as well as the A, B, C, D option to compare up to 4 images simultaneously. Also, note that down below, the toolbar gives us pixel value and coordinate information based on where our mouse is hovering over the image. Alright, now let's head over to the right side of the VFB and click on the handle here to open up this tab. Over here, we have the new Layer Panel editor available in VRay 5. Here we have the ability to manage all of our post effects right inside of the VFB, leveraging the power of a layer tree-based editor for doing color corrections as well as light mixing, which we'll cover later on. For a quick overview of the layer editor, you'll see that these color correction layers correspond to the image that I have already loaded in here. For example, we have controls for white balance, curves corrections, filmic tone mapping, exposure settings, and more. To add a new layer for color corrections, you can simply click on the green plus icon or Create Layer button, and then select from the suite of color corrections and tools for adjusting the image. For example, let's click on the filmic tone map, which contains different types of mapping curves and gamma corrections for affecting the image. And you'll see right away that it is added to the top of our layer tree. We'll cover how the layer editor functions in more detail later on, but for a basic understanding, you'll see that each layer has properties below, which we can adjust to fine-tune the look of our image. For example, I can lower the opacity of the filmic tone map correction we added to adjust its visibility. The filmic tone map also has different preset types, which each affect the image by altering the overall light and dynamic range. There are also further parameters below for some preset types to customize the tone mapping. These controls allow you to adjust the dark spots, highlights, and midtones for the image, which you can experiment with to find a look that suits your preference. In this case, I'll leave the type on Ampus and tweak the opacity, which you'll see affects the overall contrast and dynamic range of the image. Alright, now that you've seen how the properties for this particular layer can be tweaked, let's head back up to the top for a moment to glance over the other icons available. Here we can delete the selected layer, and next to that, we have options for saving and loading in layer tree presets, as well as an undo button. We'll demonstrate how these presets can be used in more detail later on. Lastly, we have the Stats tab, which gives us helpful information about the scene in our devices, such as performance and memory tracking data, depending on the scene and the rendering mode. Alright, now that you've seen an overview of the new VRay 5 VFB, let's head over into a new SketchUp scene and take a look at some exciting new tools for lighting that can get you stunning looking images and speed up your workflow. In VRay 5, we have introduced several new lighting tools to enhance your workflow. First, let's take a look at some improvements we've made for working with the VRay Sun and Sky system. We have implemented a new custom sun orientation parameter in SketchUp, which offers a straightforward widget to override the SketchUp sunlight angle and easily orient the sun in the scene. Whereas in previous versions of VRay for SketchUp, you would control the sun by the date and time in the SketchUp Shadows panel, now, directly inside the asset editor, you'll have control over the sun's horizontal and vertical angles. Let's first start an interactive render to get a sense of our scene at the moment. You'll see that we have some nice sunlight coming in from the right. Let's see how we can use the new custom sun orientation controls to quickly make some changes to our scene's lighting. Back in the asset editor, I'll open up the flyout panel to the right, and you'll see here that we can toggle on the custom orientation parameters. We can click on these two icons here to adjust the vertical angle, and then the horizontal angle respectively. You'll see right away that the swatch preview interactively updates as well, giving us some helpful visual feedback. Let's head back over to the VFB to see how these changes affect the lighting in our scene. Great, let's try making a few more changes just to see how some different sun positions look in the scene. We can also type in manually the exact horizontal angle and vertical angle that we need. There we go. Now you can see how easy it is to find interesting looking sun angles, all thanks to the handy new orientation controls in the VRay Asset Editor. In VRay 5, we have also introduced a new improved sun and sky. Currently, we are using the VRay Sky procedural texture with the HOSEC method, which I think for this scene is creating a slightly too yellowish result for my taste. Now, we can take advantage of the new improved sky model, which is an analytical sky model that offers striking sunrises and sunsets. It can be especially useful when you do not want the sun to be positioned completely above the horizon. To switch modes, simply go to the sunlight settings in the asset editor and scroll down to the sky dropdown. Here, we can switch our sky model to improved, which you'll see once again updates in our light swatch to give us a preview right away. Back in the VFB, you'll see that the improved sky makes a striking difference to the lighting for our sunset here. There is a rich spectrum of colors, and the sun glows with a vibrant orange and reddish hue. In fact, if you make adjustments to the position and size multiplier of the sun will automatically adjust its colors accordingly. For example, to show a large dark red sunset, depending on its position. These simple yet dynamic controls can create a wide variety of eye-catching and diverse lighting scenarios to play with. In this case, I'm happy with how this looks, so let's move on to explore another exciting new feature in VRay 5, which takes advantage of the versatility and dynamic potential of the new improved sky right out of the box. Alright, I've opened up another exterior scene here with a nice open sky, so that we can further explore different lighting scenarios. In VRay 5, we've introduced a new tool called the VRay Light Gen, which automatically generates a bunch of different lighting scenarios and variations for you with just a few clicks. It enables you to achieve various lighting conditions using either the VRay Sun and Sky system or HDR images to easily illuminate exteriors or interiors with natural light. The resulting lighting scenarios are then presented to you as thumbnails, which offer up to hundreds of lighting variations that you can apply to your scenes without any manual work required. The great thing about the Light Gen is that it's incredibly easy to use, while giving you a multitude of beautiful looking options to choose from. The camera's exposure is automatically stored as well for each thumbnail, so you can select your desired lighting scenario and then continue to render interactively and add artificial lights without any hassle. To demonstrate how it works, let's open up the right-hand flyout menu so that we can see the sunlight's orientation parameters. And then, let's head up to the toolbar to click on the Light Gen icon. You'll see that the Light Gen menu appears and asks us to choose between generating lighting scenarios for an interior or an exterior scene. The interior option performs a pre-pass analysis stage before generating, taking into account openings such as windows and doorways. Rather than generating completely random sun angles, it determines which light angles might be the most interesting for the sunlight to come in through. While the interior analysis uses just natural sunlight from the VRay Sun and Sky, in the exterior mode, you'll see that we also have the ability to generate scenarios using HDR images. We have heavily modified these HDRIs to improve their results, removing the ground from the images and editing them so that they closely imitate physically accurate light emission, as well as match the VRay physical sun and sky intensities as much as possible. This means that you'll get fairly accurate exposure and light levels when using the Light Gen. You can also even use the HDR images independently, by applying them to any regular dome light in your scene. Alright, in this case, let's stick with the exterior mode and take a look at the sun and sky parameters below. You'll see that we get some straightforward controls for the number of variations we want to generate related to the sun's position in the sky, such as the altitude and azimuth. For example, if we set this to 4x4 variations, we'll generate 16 different thumbnails. I'm going to increase these settings to their maximum, which you'll see below means that we will generate 162 variants. Note that we can also change the size of the thumbnails that are generated as well, with a smaller thumbnail size making results easier to calculate. I'll leave that as it is for now. Okay, let's go ahead and press the Generate button and see what we get. You'll see right away that it begins calculating and generating various thumbnail previews for us with different lighting conditions. With just the click of a button, we're now going to have hundreds of different lighting combinations to choose from, all using the stunning VRay Sun and Sky system. Since you've seen now how this process works, let's skip ahead to load in some thumbnails I've already generated in advance. At any time, we can press the Stop button here to abort the Light Gen from calculating any further. Once you've stopped a calculation, or when a generation process completes, you can press Save to save the thumbnail set as a .lightset file, which we can then load in at another time to access these exact same thumbnails. In this case though, let's press the Load button, and I'm going to load in a set of already generated thumbnails here. Okay, now you'll see as I scroll down here that we have hundreds of lighting scenarios to choose from for our scene. To select a lighting scenario, simply click on a thumbnail, and you'll see on the right that the sunlight's custom orientation parameters update to match the thumbnail settings, giving us the freedom to position the sun anywhere without being restricted by the geolocation from SketchUp. Next, if we start an interactive render, we can see how the new lighting conditions look. And there we go. We've got a nice and clean looking blue sky with some soft shadows in the foreground from the trees. Let's stop the interactive render for now and prepare to generate another set of thumbnails. We can simply click on the Reset button here at the bottom of the Light Gen UI to return back to the Setup window. Now, let's switch the light source over to the HDR mode. You'll see that the controls are very similar to the sun and sky mode, with the ability to set the number of HDR image styles to use, as well as a parameter for the number of variations or rotations to generate per HDR image. I'll leave these settings at the maximum again, which will generate 630 variants for us. In addition, we can also choose a seed, which sets the random variation of each HDR. I'll leave the seed at its current value. Note that a seed of -1 disables the randomization altogether. Now once again, we can simply press Generate and watch as the different lighting scenarios automatically appear for us, this time using a variety of HDR images. Okay, let's once again press the Stop button so we can load in a .lightset file containing the HDR thumbnails I generated in advance. Note that when using the HDR option, it will add a dome light asset called Light Gen Dome, which you can select and then further tweak in the VRay Asset Editor later. As I mentioned earlier, we can also easily swap out HDRIs manually by simply selecting the dome light and loading in a different HDR file in the bitmap settings. Note that if you'd like to save a lightset file yourself, you can simply press the Save button here and give your file a name. In this case, let's just press the Reset button again here, and then I'll press Load to bring in the thumbnails I already generated with HDRIs. And you'll see right away that we have a ton of HDR image thumbnails to choose from for our scene. Let's pause a moment and head to the Settings tab and take a look down in the camera settings at the exposure value parameter. This controls the sensitivity of the camera to the scene lighting levels. You'll see now as I click on an HDR thumbnail in the Light Gen, the exposure value setting automatically updates to an appropriate new value in order to correctly expose the image when we press Render. To demonstrate, let's go ahead and start an interactive render. And you'll see right away here that we're getting a very striking result thanks to the Light Gen's HDR image and automatically adjusted exposure value. Without any need to tweak settings, we've gotten not only one HDR lit image here, but I've also got hundreds more to choose from if this one doesn't suit my needs. Let's scroll down on our list of generated thumbnails and find an image with a completely different mood and see how it looks. I like the look of this thumbnail here, so let's try it out. You'll see that once I select it, the interactive render updates right away in the VFB. Okay, that's looking pretty nice. Let's take a look at one more lighting scenario just to see how much variety we can get out of these different Light Gen results. Now you can see just what an incredibly dramatic difference in the tone and mood of your scene you can get simply from choosing different Light Gen results and pressing Render. From rich glowing sunset skies, to clear sunny days, to overcast mornings or blue overcast evenings, the variety of combinations and possibilities you can get from the Light Gen are incredibly vast and powerful. And you don't have to stop here. In fact, we could easily use one of the Light Gen's results as a starting point and then take the image further in a new and exciting direction, adding some artificial lights or further tweaking the results to our satisfaction. Overall, the VRay Light Gen gives you an incredibly powerful tool, which makes it easy to quickly generate hundreds of impressive lighting scenarios without needing to spend any time tweaking settings. You can simply click the Generate button, sit back, and let VRay take care of the work for you, so that you can focus on the artistic aspects of creating beautiful looking images. Alright, now that we've explored the new lighting tools in VRay 5, let's switch gears and take a look at some of the new shading features that can speed up your workflow and give you even more realistic looking materials. In particular, I'd first like to show you some important updates that we have made to the VRay generic material. Let's take a look at this scene I've prepared here, containing some lemons and a serving plate on a countertop. I'd like to show you how we can use the new VRay generic material to make this serving tray look more convincing. For a quick background, if you're familiar with previous versions of VRay for SketchUp, you may recall that we had a separate VRay generic material and also a PBR material for when you were using PBR textures such as metalness and roughness texture maps. In VRay 5, we have merged the PBR material parameters into the VRay generic material so that you can now use one straightforward shader for all your generic material needs. This means you can now utilize metalness and roughness maps while also taking advantage of all the other VRay generic material parameters that were not previously accessible in the PBR material. To demonstrate how the new VRay generic material works in a simple PBR workflow, let's head down to the metalness parameter. I'd like this material to be metallic, so let's increase this slider from 0 to 1. The metalness slider acts as an on-off switch, since physically based materials are either considered a non-metal or a metal, represented as 0 or 1 respectively, using the slider. Now, I'd also like to switch the surface control parameter from use glossiness to use roughness. The surface control modifies the behavior of all material parameters controlling the surface smoothness. The reason we have two options is because there are different workflows that interpret surface smoothness one way or another. In short, roughness is simply the inverse of glossiness, and roughness texture maps are commonly used in PBR workflows. Once we've switched modes, you'll see that the reflection glossiness parameter above has switched to reflection roughness. Now, this reflection roughness parameter controls the sharpness of reflections, with a value of 1 creating rough diffuse reflection, while a value of 0 creates perfectly smooth, mirror-like reflections. You'll see now as I move the slider down to 0.05 that the preview swatch updates to show the material becoming much more reflective, with just a bit of blurriness. In the VFB, we'll see the results here as the serving plate material becomes much smoother looking. Alright, that's looking much better and more realistic. Now you've seen how we can create a simple metallic material following a PBR workflow, all using the VRay generic material in VRay 5. Next, let's move on to set up a different material in the same scene here and explore how to work with the new coat layer parameter. In VRay 5, we have implemented a new coat layer for the VRay generic material, which makes it easy to add a shiny polished character to your materials. For example, it removes the need for material layering when you want to add a coat layer on top of a metallic base surface. Now, it is much simpler to create a variety of materials, such as metallic paint, carbon with coating, certain types of plastics, varnished wood, and more. This can significantly speed up your shading workflow, and in addition, you can get even faster render results using the coat parameters than with traditional methods such as using a blend material. To demonstrate, I've already selected the paint blurry white material here in the scene, so let's go ahead and twirl down the coat parameters for it. You'll see here that we have several different parameters for controlling the appearance of the coat in our scene. The coat amount simply specifies the blending weight of the coat layer. A value of 0 means no coat layer, while higher values blend the coat gradually. The coat color determines the coat layer's color, and the coat glossiness controls the sharpness of reflections, with a value of 1 being perfect glass-like reflections. Also, note that when you have the generic material's surface control option set to use roughness, the coat glossiness will be called the coat roughness, and its effect will be the inverse. Lastly, the coat IOR specifies the index of refraction for the coat layer, or how much the light is bent as it enters the coat. Since I'm trying to enable a nice looking coat here for the table beneath the lemons, let's just slide the coat amount from 0 to 1 and see how that looks. And there you go. We're immediately getting some nice looking reflections in the coat layer. Now you can see just how quickly you can get a nice looking coat layer in VRay 5, and how easy it is to experiment without any need for complex blend materials. We could always further tweak the other coat parameters below, but I'm liking how this looks already. So let's move on to take a look at another new material layer, the sheen layer. Okay, I'm now in a scene facing a piece of cloth on a couch. Using the new sheen layer within the VRay generic material, we can easily create fabric materials with a realistic cloth-like appearance. The sheen parameters act as a top reflective layer on the diffuse color, resulting in a fall-off effect for cloth with straightforward controls that enables us to create materials such as satin or velvet. Let's go ahead and start the interactive render here to see what the cloth material looks like without any of the sheen parameters enabled. As the image clears up, you'll see that the cloth looks okay, but it's missing that additional fall-off effect that makes it appear like a textile material. Let's head back to our materials, and selecting the fabric, I'm going to open up the right-hand flyout menu to look at the sheen settings. Now, you'll notice that the sheen drop-down menu is not immediately visible here, and that is because we'll need to toggle on the advanced settings option here. Now we'll see the sheen drop-down appear, so let's take a look at its parameters. The sheen has two straightforward controls built in, enabling you to alter the sheen's color, with black disabling the sheen effect altogether. Meanwhile, the sheen glossiness controls the sharpness of the reflections. A value of 1 means all of the light reaches the diffuse color, therefore diminishing the sheen's visibility, whereas when the glossiness value is lower, the sheen effect appears more pronounced. Also, once again, note that when you have the generic materials surface control option set to used roughness, the sheen glossiness will be called the sheen roughness, and its effect will be the inverse. In order to get a more realistic looking sheen color, we can actually copy the existing diffuse color texture from the swatch above, and paste that into the sheen color texture slot. I'll paste it as a copy so that we can make further color corrections to it to make it brighter, without affecting the original diffuse color texture. To do so, let's right-click on the texture swatch again, and this time head to the Wrap-In menu. The Wrap-In options will place the existing texture within a new one, and then plug the new texture into the original slot, so that we can easily make changes to the existing texture. In this case, I'll select the Color Correction Wrap-In texture, so that we can lighten up the texture a bit. Now, in the color correction parameters, let's head down to the brightness setting and increase it up to something like 0.36. You'll see in the preview swatch now that the texture color is a much lighter grayish blue color. Great! Now let's head back to the material settings and bring the sheen glossiness down a decent amount to something like 0.2 in order to reflect more light. Now you'll see in the preview swatch that our fabric is showing a fairly pronounced sheen effect. Let's head over to the VFB now to see how it looks in our scene. There we go. I'm liking how that looks. Thanks to the fact that we copied the fabric's diffuse texture color over, we've been able to add a realistic looking sheen color that makes our fabric appear much more like cloth with a gentle fall-off effect. Alright, now let's move on to take a look at several new randomization parameters we've introduced in VRay 5, which make creating realistic looking materials easier than ever. Okay, I've switched to a different camera here, now focusing on the wooden floor in the scene. In VRay 5 for SketchUp, we've introduced a new set of randomization parameters for the multi-sub texture. Now it is possible to easily create color variations, while keeping the number of textures used low, and in the process, speeding up your workflow. Let's go ahead and demonstrate how it works by adding some randomization to the wooden floor. To start, I've already selected the wood material here in the asset editor. So now, let's right-click on the Diffuse Colors texture swatch, and then head to the Wrap-In menu. Here we can select the multi-sub texture to place our Diffuse Colors texture inside of the multi-sub and make tweaks to the diffuse. The VRay multi-sub texture distributes multiple textures to many objects via one single material based on specified IDs or a random distribution. First, you'll need to set the Get ID From mode to establish what ID to use to feed the multi-sub texture data to the material. You'll see that we have options such as the Face Material ID, where VRay considers the face IDs when feeding the color or texture data to the materials, as well as Object IDs, or several random By modes for assigning random colors based on an ID type. In this case, let's choose the Random by Face Material ID mode, which assigns random colors based on the material IDs of the object's faces. Now, we'll see the new randomization parameters exposed. These are the hue, saturation, and gamma variation parameters, as well as a seed for changing the randomization pattern. Each of their input values are a percentage of the hue, saturation, value, or gamma range. To start, let's try increasing the hue just a bit to see how that affects our image. As a general note, you usually won't need to set these values very high, or they can start to overpower the image, so I'll increase these gently. You'll see right away here that the hue variation is kicked in, as the wood flooring now shows several reddish hue colors popping out. Let's bring back the hue just a bit, and then increase the saturation variation parameter next. Now you'll see that we're getting some interesting variation in the saturation across the different wooden floorboards, which helps to make the flooring appear much more natural looking. Next, let's also increase the gamma variation just a tiny bit to see how that impacts the flooring. Now you can see right away just how much influence these variation parameters can have on the overall look of your materials. However, I think the effect is a bit too strong for my taste, so let's bring back the gamma to something very subtle like 0.01. There we go! Now our floorboards have a much richer set of color hues and more contrast, making them feel much more realistic rather than uniform. With just a few small tweaks to the hue, saturation, and gamma variation parameters, we've been able to add randomization to our scene and create a more dynamic and realistic looking floor, without any need for complex shader setups. Now, you can see how the multi-subtexture's powerful randomization controls make it easier than ever to make your textures more interesting, less repetitive, and more realistic as a result. Next, let's explore another way to add randomization to the textures in your scene, this time using the new UVW placement texture. Alright, as you can see here, I've switched to a different camera, which gives us a nice view of this leather couch material here. However, as you may have already noticed, there is a pretty distinct and repetitive tiling pattern visible here on the leather. Let's see if we can use the new UVW placement texture in VRay 5 to randomize this pattern and help to make the leather look more authentic. In the asset editor, you'll see that we've already got a bitmap texture loaded into the diffuse color for our generic VRay material. As you can see in the swatch preview, the texture pattern is even more visible here, so let's see what we can do to make it less apparent. First, let's drop down the texture placement menu and take a look at its parameters. In VRay 5, we can now switch the type to the new mapping source option, which will let us use an external UV placement source for the texture placement. If we then simply click on its texture swatch, we can add the new UVW placement texture to it. For an overview, the VRay UVW placement texture operates as a custom mapping source that can be shared between different textures. It is equipped with randomization parameters that allow randomizing the texture placement based on different IDs, names, and so forth. The VRay UVW placement texture also has additional controls for the amount and method of randomization. To start, let's increase the repeat UV amount, which increases the number of times the texture is repeated in the 0 to 1 UV square, and click the chain icon to lock the U and V values together. Now our texture is repeated more frequently, which will help it to match with the previous texture placement method when we add randomization. So let's head to the randomization dropdown below. You'll see that we have a bunch of randomization options here to choose from, and in this case, I'd like to use the new stochastic tiling method, which changes the mapping based on the UV tile and can be used for patterns that have repetition. In this case, let's leave the other tiling values at their defaults, and let's see what impact this has on our render. And there you go. Now you can see how just by adding the UVW placement texture and enabling the stochastic tiling option, we've removed the visible pattern from our texture. I'll also note that when you enable stochastic tiling, you'll see that the tile blend slider becomes available to use below, which lets you control the amount of edge blending between adjacent tiles. You can play with this parameter together with the various U and V offset parameters below, or the UV rotation, to restrict the angle of the rotation of the stochastic tiling and create interesting blending results that can suit a variety of needs. However, even with just the default stochastic tiling values, our leather couch material already looks much more realistic, without any need for overlaying multiple textures. Now let's move on to take a look at the updated material library in VRay 5 to see how it has been improved and how it can help to speed up your workflow. you'll find the updated VRay 5 preset material library in the left-hand flyout menu of the asset editor. Rather than having to download the entire library during the installer process, you will instead be presented with the option to download the preset material library the first time you open this panel after installing VRay 5 for SketchUp. Once the download is complete, the library assets remain permanently available. In addition, if you have other VRay products also installed on the system, such as VRay 5 for Rhino or VRay 5 for 3ds Max, the asset files will be shared between them so that the assets are not re-downloaded more than once. As you have seen, VRay 5 has introduced several shader updates, such as the coat and sheen layers, PBR parameters, the new randomization controls, and more. As a result, we have updated the entire built-in material library to make sure these new material parameters are utilized. The quality of most materials has been increased as well, with higher resolution texture maps having replaced the old 1K texture maps. For example, let's select a material here and take a look at its parameters. I'm going to select this wall paint stucco material and drag it into our scene's materials. Now, if we head to its diffuse color texture, you'll see that in the Texture Placement tab, there is a UVW placement mapping source already set up, with randomization using stochastic tiling enabled by default. For another example, we can head to the Fabric category, and let's import this fabric purple material into our scene. Now if we switch to its advanced settings, you'll see that the sheen parameters have been used in order to give our fabric an even more realistic looking appearance. Now, you can take advantage of these new features as well as easily customize the preset materials further to suit your needs. You can even analyze how these are constructed and learn more about creating your own materials. Altogether, the updated material library utilizes the incredibly powerful new features available in VRay 5 to get you stunning looking preset materials so that you can get shading quickly, with a higher level of quality and realism than ever before. Alright, I've now switched over to a camera angle of a table here, showing an architectural maquette. Let's now take a look at the new contour controls, which can be used to help make renders look like scale models, as well as to create stylized images. In previous versions of VRay, you would typically need to create contours using a time-consuming shader setup with the VRay Toon material. Now in VRay 5, you can simply add or remove contours as an attribute to any shader, without any need for reassigning materials. In addition, contours can also be assigned and controlled globally, so that you can easily apply contours to your entire scene. To demonstrate how to use the contours on a material, I've selected the material here for the walls of the maquette house. To add contours, we can simply click the Add Attribute icon here, and then select the Contour option. You'll see right away that this adds the Contours menu dropdown below, as well as updates the swatch preview above with black outlines, since the default contours line color is black. In the dropdown, you'll see that we have a decent number of parameters we can tweak to create a look that suits our needs. In this case, the parameters that I think are most useful for getting started are the line color and the width. I'm going to leave the line color black since I think this works well here, but let's head down to the width parameter to adjust the width of the outlines. I'm going to increase the width here to something a bit larger and more visible. You'll see how this changes the appearance of the lines in the preview swatch above. Let's see how this looks if we start an interactive render for our scene. And you'll see that simply by adding the contour attribute to our material and increasing the width, we have now given our maquette model a far more interesting appearance, thanks to the addition of the stylized contour lines. Of course, there are some other parameters you can tweak even further, such as enabling the inner line controls dropdown, so that you can have granular control over the appearance of the inner and outer lines. What if I'd like to apply contours to my entire scene? In this case, we can switch to using the global contour controls instead. If we head to the settings panel in the asset editor, you'll find the global contour controls toggle is in the right-hand flyout menu. When we toggle them on and then start an interactive render, you'll see that we're now getting contour lines applied to the entire scene, rather than just the maquette model. Just like when you apply the contours to a single shader, you'll find some similar parameters available for tweaking their appearance in the global settings. In this case, I'm going to leave these settings as they are. Altogether, Now you've seen how with the new controls, applying contours to your entire scene is as easy as clicking on a toggle. In addition, you can easily add contours to existing materials and tweak their appearance using an assortment of intuitive parameters without any need to spend time reassigning shaders. Okay, now that you've seen the upgrades we've made to the shaders and the improved workflows in VRay 5, let's get ready to dive into post-production and discuss light mixing and compositing. I've opened up our final render here, so let's explore a crucial step before we can do light mixing in VRay 5. For a quick background, when a light mix render element is added before rendering, the intensity and color of the lights and light-emitting materials can be changed directly from the VFB, both during and after rendering. This means lights can be enabled and disabled using the light mix controls all in one convenient location, rather than having to navigate to individual light parameters. And, since you don't need to re-render your final output to make tweaks to your lighting, you can easily experiment with a wide variety of moods and lighting styles, all using a single rendered image. To set up your scene for light mixing, you'll simply need to open the asset editor and add the light mix render element. Then, in the right-hand flyout menu, just make sure that you've set the group by parameter to the mode of your choice in order to specify how to group the lighting information. For example, in this case, I'd like to have my lights grouped together as layers so that the lighting information for each layer is stored in a separate channel. And there you go. Now that you've added the light mix render element, you can proceed with your production render setup and any other render elements you'd like to use, just as you would normally from here. And then when you're ready, go ahead and press render. Alright, to get started, the first thing we'll want to do here is make sure the source layer is selected. And then in the properties here, we will see the option to switch to the light mix mode. Right away when I select it, you'll see that the properties update to show a bunch of different lights in our scene. Again, since we set our group by mode to layers, these light channels here represent all the layers of lights that I had in the scene. To start, let's press the checkbox next to the All button, which will turn off all of the lights in our image. Now, we can begin to build up our image's lighting from scratch and work with each layer of lights one by one until we have created an ideal lighting scenario. In this case, let's head down to the Rest channel, which contains all of the lights that do not fit into the other groups or individual channels, plus the atmospheric effects. As you can see, this channel contains the atmospheric fog in our scene. Next, let's enable the Light Dome, which will naturally display the dome light and its sky in the background. Now, let's enable the Lights A channel. These are a layer of lights that are mostly in the interiors of the houses here. Let's also enable the Lights B channel, which is another set of lights that are mostly in the interiors as well. Now that we have some light to work with, I'd like to make some tweaks. I'll start by increasing the multiplier value here for the Lights B channel. Increasing the multiplier will make the lights look brighter, and decreasing it will make them look dimmer. That's helping to make these lights pop and give our scene a bit more contrast. Next, let's enable the Lights Exterior, which are some artificial exterior lights. This time, let's click on its color swatch and make some changes to the hue of the lights. You'll see as I drag around in the color picker that the lights update in nearly real time as well, to give us a nice preview of the changes we're making as we test out different colors. I think I'll go for a darker yellow color here to complement the evening sky colors. I like how that's looking. Now, let's also increase the multiplier for the Lights Exterior to make our scene brighten up a bit more like a well-lit neighborhood. Next, let's enable the Lights C. These are again mostly interior lights nearby. And there we go. That's already looking quite interesting, just with these few tweaks we've made so far. Let's also enable the self-illumination option. This will enable the city lights in the background. They're definitely not bright enough though, so let's increase the multiplier a decent amount, say from 1 to 30. Now that's looking much better. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with my lighting setup here, so let's head up to the Layers section and select the lens effects for the scene. Let's now enable the lens effects in the properties below. Alright, that's coming on a bit too strong for my taste, so let's dial back the opacity a bit here, to something around 0.4. And there we go. Now you've seen how we can do some quick tweaks using light mixing, in order to give our scene a much more dynamic and contrasty look and feel, without any need to re-render the image. Next, let's take a look at how we can do some compositing in the new layer editor to take our rendered image even further. Alright, now that we're done light mixing, we can either choose to switch over to the composite mode and leave our light mix changes behind, or we can press the To Composite button here, which will send our changes from the light mix to the compositor for further refinement. In this case, let's press the To Composite button and continue to work with the tweaks we made during light mixing to take our image even further. Up in the layer editor, you'll see that beneath the source composite layer, we have a folder containing all of our light mix changes as render elements, in case we'd like to make any further adjustments to those layers. Let's go ahead and twirl up this folder here and explore how we can do some color corrections on a single render element, as well as our whole image here. As I mentioned briefly earlier, the new layer tree-based editing system allows us to do all sorts of nuanced color corrections, as well as set blending modes and even combine render elements, right here in the VFB. The layer system applies corrections from the bottom to the top, meaning layers on top of the stack are considered in the foreground, and the result of all layers below it is considered the background. To start doing some color corrections, I'm going to right-click on the source composite layer, and in the new layer menu, select Render Element. This will put a render element layer above our light mix folder, which you'll see by default is set to the RGB color element, but we can choose whichever render element we want to do some color corrections on. Let's switch this to the atmosphere render element so that we can make it brighter. Since the render element's blend mode is already set to add, this will help the atmosphere effect to stand out a bit. Next, if we right-click on the atmosphere layer, we can apply color corrections directly to it. For example, let's select the curves correction. Now, you'll see that a curves layer has appeared above the atmosphere, with a downward pointing arrow next to it. This indicates that the curves layer is being applied only to its parent, which is the atmosphere layer, rather than the entire image. This means that we can make isolated color corrections to the atmosphere without affecting any other layers. The curves allow you to remap the image colors using a Bezier curve, as well as save and load .acv curve files from Adobe Photoshop. To demonstrate, let's click somewhere in the curve editor to create a point. Now, I can click on the point and drag it to reposition it somewhere, as well as tweak the handles to affect the shape of the curve. You'll see that the image is updating as we make adjustments as well, so that we can see the effect of our changes. And there we go. I'm liking how that looks. Okay, now that you've seen how editing a layer using the curve editor works, you've got the fundamental idea of compositing in the VFB and making changes to different render layers. You can also move on from here to further refine your image. For example, to apply color corrections to the entire image as well, like we did earlier using the Filmic tone map. Lastly, I'd also like to show you how layer tree presets work in VRay 5. When you have made changes to your image using the layer editor, you can click on this icon up here to save your corrections as a layer tree preset file. If you save a layer tree preset with composite corrections, you can also use the preset with another image, so long as the image is rendered with the exact same render elements that are saved with the preset. You can also easily save universal presets that exclude any composite or light mix corrections if you only add and/or modify layers above the source layer in the editor. Next, if you'd like to load in a preset, you can open the VFB settings and head to the Layers tab. Here we can set the presets path, which will allow us quick access to whatever layer tree preset files have been saved at this location. I'll paste the path I've set up in advance and make sure to hit Save and Close. Now, if I click on this icon here, I'll get quick access to the custom layer presets I've placed in that folder location. You'll see here that I've prepared a few presets in advance, and I can hover my mouse over them to take a look at them. You'll see as each preset loads that the different color corrections I've saved can have a dramatic impact on the mood and appearance of the image. This will give you an idea of the many different capabilities of working with the light mixer and compositor in the new VRay 5 VFB. With only a single render, you can now go beyond rendering and easily make changes using the powerful suite of color correction controls, blending modes, and ability to tweak specific render elements to get stunning looking images all within VRay 5. Lastly, when you're all done compositing and happy with your image, just don't forget to save your render out of the VFB by clicking on the save icon. In addition, we now support an experimental out-of-core GPU render mode. This means you can render on GPU even if your scene exceeds your GPU VRAM limit. Note that since this is currently an experimental feature, this option is only available for CUDA-enabled GPUs and is not yet supported for RTX. In VRay 5, we updated the dirt textures functionality with additional parameters. It now employs both ambient and inner occlusion modes so that you can shade open corners instead of crevices with the occluded color. As a result, you can easily create procedural weathered streaks and dirt in crevices to create even more realistic and grimy-looking materials. The VRay generic material now has a built-in bump layer implemented. There is no longer any need to add bump attributes to a material. You can simply use the built-in bump parameters section instead. In addition, the new bump offers better shader performance than before. When using the VRay denoiser, you can enable the Affect All Channels option, which now reduces blurriness for objects seen through glass when using denoising. 2D displacement is also now supported on GPU and offers an advantage in that it preserves all the details in the displacement map, provided that the object has valid UV coordinates. The VRay Ruby API has also been redesigned and extended. It streamlines third-party extensions development and ensures long-term support for scripts using it. Documentation for the new API has been added to the installation folder and can be found in the VRay for SketchUp extension menu in the API documentation. Okay, now you've seen how in VRay 5 you will have access to many powerful new features that can speed up your workflow and get you more realistic looking results with less effort. And you can even go beyond rendering with the new layer-based compositor and suite of color correction tools available right out of the box. In addition, VRay Vision brings real-time rendering to VRay for SketchUp. Now you can work in your scenes in real time and even save images or animations. VRay 5 also introduces new features to make lighting your scenes easier than ever. From the improved sun and sky system to the lighting scenarios you can automatically generate with the new VRay Light Gen, the possibilities are nearly endless to unleash your creative potential. We have also introduced several new randomization parameters in VRay 5 that make it easier than ever to create realistic-looking materials. The new multi-subtextures hue, saturation, and gamma can help you to add some variation to your textures. Meanwhile, the UVW placement texture offers flexible controls to remove repetitive patterns. Lastly, the redesigned VRay frame buffer boasts a sleek new interface and offers a powerful and intuitive new layer editor to manage your color corrections. In addition, the new light mix and compositing modes make it possible to go beyond rendering and handle all your post-processing needs, all within VRay 5. If you'd like to try out VRay 5 for SketchUp, please visit our website, chaosgroup.com, for more information and to download a free trial. If you have any further questions, please feel free to check out our docs page for additional information about these new features as well. And for the latest updates, please click subscribe on our YouTube channel, Chaos Group TV, so that you can keep up to date with our latest new products and releases. Thank you for joining me for this webinar session, and I hope to see you next time.